Today we're in Luke 19 verse 11 to 27. It is a meaty, rich, challenging passage. And I said a few days ago that prophecy is a bit like lasagna or tiramisu. It's a many layered thing. Parables are the same. There are different layers and levels of which we can read them. And this parable is the parable of the 10 minas. A mina is a coin worth about 3 months' wages. So it's a substantial amount of money. And on a very first natural level, an historical level, this parable echoes real events, 4 BC. These hearers would be very familiar with how when King Herod the Great died, his son Archelaus had to go to Rome to have his kingship approved and authorized. Because the Jews were ruling under a greater authority, Caesar. And the historian Josephus, he writes that Archelaus, whilst he was away, the Jews in that place revolted. They didn't live well. So it echoes that. Now, the parable starts with the words, whilst they were listening to this. Did you notice that? Whilst they were listening to this. What does this refer to? Well, it's verse 10. Jesus is explaining how the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. So this parable's overall arching theme is about salvation. And it says in the parable that the people had wrongly assumed that the kingdom was going to appear all at once. They thought Jesus was going to be made earthly king and overthrow the natural rulers. I think that's really interesting. Jesus' plan was for his kingdom to gradually unfold, bit by bit unfold, more and more as heaven invades earth, and now a not yet kingdom. As humans welcome King Jesus to reign and rule on the throne of their hearts, his kingdom unfolds. Then Jesus gives them this sort of heads up by telling a parable about a king, meaning himself, is referring to himself, who has to go to a distant place, heaven, to have his kingship authorized. Now we see that throughout the epistles, throughout Revelation, Jesus ascends to heaven to be seated on the highest throne until the day that he returns, like we see in the parable. And when he returns as King of all the earth. Well, I can't wait for that day. I hope you are looking forward to it. The thing is, how do we as his servants live in the waiting until that time? The parable says we're called to live in obedience. Verse 13, clear instructions were given to those people. And they were called to live in multiplication. They were called to take what they were gifted with and invest it and grow it. Now the mina, the valuable coin, represents that gift, that deposit of the gospel. A bit like the seeds and the sower, very similar parable. Receive the seed, receive the coin, but some people don't apply it, they don't nurture it, they don't allow it to bear fruit in their lives. In this parable, we see that those who multiply the seed are rewarded. They're appointed over cities to rule in the new earth when King Jesus returns. Like they used to say, it's training for reign in this earth. Heaven will be on earth and we will still have a heavenly work and a community to be part of. So what sort of people will be reigning over 10 cities in this new kingdom? Well, just as a little aside, I read some research recently that said if you look right across the world today at the typical Christian who is effectively following Jesus, in other words, they're winning souls, they're making disciples, the typical multiplier, well, that person would be female, in her 20s, and dark-skinned. I just love that. I find it deeply challenging as well. Of course, all of us are invited into and empowered to take what we've received and multiply it in the lives of others. But I just think, well, what can we learn from our sisters in Christ in places like Africa, India, and Iraq, where they're really doing the stuff? Finally, what about the servant who does nothing with their coin? And as a result, in the passage, they are judged and condemned and they lose their coin. Is that saying that we could lose our salvation? Well, personally, I don't think so. This person clearly had misunderstood who Jesus is. He was afraid of the king, and he believed the king to be a harsh ruler. He just hadn't had that revelation of grace that empowers us to live holiness and fruitfulness. He was holding on to the coin, the truth of the gospel, in his hand, but he hadn't applied it to his heart. And we may know people like that in our nation. They call themselves Christian. They're connected with Christian community. They know details about Jesus, but they don't really know him. They don't even put the coin on deposit, as it were. They do nothing with it, with that message. The key, really, in the parable is about what we do with the gift of the gospel. To reject it is to bring judgment upon ourselves. But for those who accept the gift and nurture the gift, it leads to peace with God on this earth and great reward in the next. So let's be those people who live in obedience and who live with the process of multiplication in mind.